talk a bit about why to play Axiom, which is the first faction here. Axiom, we have Traced, we have Subhash, and we have Sierra. Sierra is the starter deck hero for it. Each of the 6 factions have a starter deck hero, which is kind of the most basic one you can play. For this example, Sierra is based around landmarks. The only one that's entirely based around landmarks. And yeah, when you play a 3-cost or more landmark, you can exhaust her, which just means tap her to make a 2/2/2. Let's see if we can pull up what a 2/2/2 robot looks like. Maybe in a token somewhere in here. Brass bug, brass bug, brass bug, brass bug. Might not even show us the token. Brass bug. Surprisingly hard to show you what the little token looks like. Even this won't show you, will it? Well, you get a 2/2/2, and your characters all have 3 stats, as you can see on the left here. So 2/2/2 means 2 in forest, 2 in mountain, 2 in water, or whatever you want to call it. Green, orange, blue, grass, rock. I don't know. I think I usually call it like, yeah, grass, mountain, water. I don't know why that's just what I started default calling it. But you get a 2/2/2. The problem is you are limited to 2 landmark zones. 2 landmark zones means after you get your 3rd landmark, it stays that turn, but at the end of your turn, when you go to clean up everything, you have to get rid of one of your landmarks. You can only have 2 at a time. Landmarks are quite strong sometimes. They are permanent, so they never go away. They usually are a bit more expensive and make you lose a little bit of advantage when you play them because they don't impact the board, so you might lose that turn cycle that day. But you get the 2/2/2 bug from Sierra, which hopefully alleviates some of the disadvantage of playing the landmark. I think the issue here is that the landmarks generally are not worth playing once you have 2, right? Like, you're just kind of losing an advantage. You could just be playing a character instead. Of course, you get a 2/2/2 from Sierra, but I don't know if that's really worth it. I think that puts Sierra in D tier, I'll say. Maybe she's C tier because Brass Bug Hive, but we're gonna make this a controversial day 1 tier list. And so we'll put her in D tier. I don't think, if she had 3 landmark slots, I think she'd be interesting. But she only has 2, so after you've played your 2nd landmark, she just loses a lot of her efficiency. Let's talk about Subhash. Subhash is probably the better Brass Bug Hive user. So Brass Bug Hive is probably, wow, we're not typing right. Brass Bug Hive is probably the strongest landmark in the game, or one of them. The rare version right here for Axiom in particular is the one we care about. It is a 6 cost. It is a landmark. It does make a 2/2/2 robot token in target expedition when it enters. It also at noon makes a 2/2/2, so every day. But these are actually all 3/3/3s because whenever a robot joins your expedition, it gains 1 boost. So you are, basically getting a 3/3/3 when it enters. You get a 3/3/3 every day. And Subhash really combos with this because, of course, Sierra combos a little because when you play this, you get a bug the first time. But can I find... Yeah, so Subhash here at noon lets you pay 1, put a card from your hand in reserve to create a bug. So for 1 resource, you are getting to make a 2nd bug, which ends up being a 3/3/3 if you have a hive out. Once you have 2 hives, those stack, so you'll get a 4/4/4. So if you think about the scenario where you end up getting 2 hives out, every turn for 1 resource, you make 12/12/12 in stats, which is, I think, impossible for any other deck to beat effectively. Of course, this requires quite a lot of setup. You have to draw both brass bug hives. You have to play them. They cost 6 each, which is, excuse me, pretty expensive. But it's certainly possible. I think because he revolves pretty heavily around brass bug hive, that's his main disadvantage. If you don't find brass bug hive, I think he's pretty weak. Once you find the first one, I think he's above average. He'd be like a B tier hero. C is like your average hero, right? Like super average. B is above average. A is really good, and S is like broken, basically. Like this hero probably needs changes, or is just the clear best deck. A is above average, you know, quite a bit above average. This is a little above average. Average, below average. So I think he's B when he has 1 hive out, and then he's A when he has 2 hives out. Maybe like bordering S, because when he has 2 hives out, it's really hard to beat 12, 12, 12 in stats every turn. And I'll go over some example deck lists, but you do have lists like this. This is my robots deck, and it is with Subhash and Marmo, but you have these 3 hives, but you also have a lot of ways to turbo them out. So with Foundry Mechanic, Rare Martingale, Croupier, and Frog Prince, all of these have a discard effect here that lets your next card cost 1 less. So you can effectively play this on your second turn. If on your very first turn with the 3 mana, you can put 2 of these out, then on your next turn, you can discard both of them and start with the hive. So you can, on the very second turn of the game, get a hive out, almost always win from there, unless they can remove the hive right away. Pretty strong. I think he's A tier. And then I think Trace is also A tier. Trace is pretty powerful, has a really strong reserve effect, reserve combo effect, where Traced, let's go over to Trace somewhere, Turbo Traced. Traced here, I have a lot of rares in this right now, but Trace says, if a card leaves a reserve during the afternoon, if I have less than 5 scrap counters, I gain a scrap counter. If you have 5 or more scrap counters, he has the ability to exhaust him, draw a card, then put a card from your hand in reserve. So he does nothing at first, but then gets probably the strongest hero ability once you work for it, right? So you get 5 counters on him, then you can use him every turn to basically draw a free card. You do have the downside of putting something into reserve, so it's not technically a full card by altered standards, because it goes to reserve and you don't get to play it twice, but you're playing a lot of synergy of playing things from reserve to make up for that. But I think mostly it's this landmark again. Of course, the landmarks are really what make Axiom hum. The 2 really good Axiom heroes are both based entirely around broken landmarks, with Brass Bug Hive for Subhash, and then Trace cares a lot about this Haven, Bravos, Bastion. It just says it's only 2, which is really, really cheap. When you play it, you resupply, so already it's kind of half replacing itself. And then it says your characters have the ability. This ability means when they're played from reserve right here. So when they're played, your characters have the ability, when played from reserve, I gain 1 boost, which gives +1/+1/+1, so +1 in all regions. So it also often resupplies a character to use that. But this is insane, because you're putting a card directly into your reserve with Trace after you draw it, which means it's then getting +1. If you have 2 of these, they stack, so your characters are all getting +2, +2, +2. This is a really fast low to the ground deck. I mean, I don't know if I have anything in here that costs more than 3. No. Yeah, it's really, really low to the ground aggro. You're trying to get Traced Hero ability online by day 3 at the earliest. I don't think you can do it earlier than that, or day 4. I think if you don't get it online by day 4, you probably lose. But if you can get it online by day 3 or 4, you're doing pretty great, and then you can just kind of outvalue your opponent over day 5, 6, and 7. I think once you get to day 8, you start running out of gas and losing to decks with more mana, higher mana curves. So you're really focused on those like day 5, 6, 7, where you're trying to double win, which you can also often do, or you often double win on day 1 as well, because you're so cheap you can play into both lanes with like pretty decent stats. Pretty interesting aggro deck, but I'll put it in A as well here. I think it goes fast enough to be worth putting there. Let's go into... Who did they put next on the list? I think they put Bravos. Yeah, Bravos. I think Bravos is tied for the weakest of the factions so far. We've got these 3 right here. Kojo is the starter deck hero for the faction. He is probably the strongest of the 3, on kind of the opposite of what Axiom was like. Kojo has the ability... we can actually just go into here and this will be faster. Kojo has the ability at noon, if you were the first player, create a Buddha 2/2/2 companion token in your companion expedition. So you pass who's the first player every turn, so this will be every other turn. You'll get a free 2/2/2 token. This is not bad. A free 2/2/2 is pretty good. Comparing that to Subhash, who has to pay 1 to get that. He can get it every turn, but he has to pay 1 and also lose essentially half a card by putting a card into reserve. It's quite a bit better in terms of not losing advantage there, but I'd say probably equal power level overall. If you compare it to Sierra, it's much better because he's getting 1 every other turn. She only gets 1 like twice a game because you're probably only playing 2 landmarks. Maybe you play a 3rd landmark 3 times a game, but then it's close to equal. But if you go 8 days, which it often will, then it's like his is automatically better. I don't think he's too much better than average, though. I think he's almost the pinnacle of average. Like he's essentially getting 2/2/2 worth of stats for free every other turn. I mean, that's exactly what he's getting. And that is probably the most average ability. Like, you can't really make anything insane happen with it. There's no combo like with Subhash where you can play these landmarks that buff your brass bug hives. He doesn't have any advantage to that, right? There's not really anything to buff the Buddha token. There's not even really any synergy to sacrifice it if you even wanted. There's not too much synergy with Buddha at all. So I'm just going to put him into C, which is average. Yeah, we can even put some descriptive terms here. He's average. This is very good. Not that. This is above average. This is broken. Yeah, he's average. Nothing wrong with him. He's fine, but he's not anything particularly special, I would say. Let's talk about Basira. Basira has a kind of interesting ability as well. Basira says when a character you control gains 1 or more boosts, you may exhaust me to have target character gain 1 boost. So there's quite a bit of a requirement here where first you have to have the character actually gain the boost. But once that has happened, you can use her to give any other character, a different character, the same character. Doesn't really matter. You can have them give 1 boost. If you do compare this to a character we'll get to in a bit, which is Tasia, she says the first character you play each afternoon, which is when you play cards, gains 1 boost. So she will always give you 1 boost, compared to Basira, which hopefully will give you 1 boost every turn. Excuse me, but is a bit more conditional, right? Like, if you, for some reason, aren't able to produce a boost with your cards on a turn, she suddenly has not made you a boost. So she has to hit every turn to get equal value with Kojo here, right? He's getting 2/2/2 every other turn, so he's getting effectively 1/1/1 every turn. She is hopefully getting +1/+1/+1 every turn through her ability, but she has to actually hit. So I think she is below average for that reason. I think if you can't at least guarantee to make 2/2/2 every turn, like Kojo, something's needs to be fixed. Both of these heroes you can see, or you could also call it 1/1/1 every turn, right? You need a free 1/1/1 worth of stats every turn to at least be average. Neither of these heroes do that. this hero does, these heroes can do quite a bit more. Sometimes these both require a bit of work, right? You need some synergy with your landmarks, etc. But I think that is worth something, right? They have maybe a slightly lower floor, but a much higher ceiling, which is what we're looking for. There's really nothing to make these go more. You know, they have some landmarks as well, but they would do the same thing if with a better, different hero ability. Looking at the last hero here, kind of the most interesting one, Atsadi. Atsadi begins the game with 5 heroism counters. When you play a character with hand cost greater than or equal to my number of heroism counters, you draw a card and he gains a heroism counter. So free card draw is great. Card draw is a little harder to quantify, of course, than just saying 1/1/1 every turn. Of course, you start with only 3 mana, so maybe you ramp on the first turn, but if we say you don't ramp on the first turn, maybe you just don't draw it. His ability won't activate until day 3 when you play your first 5 cost. And next turn you can play a 6, 7, 8, etc. He'll draw a card every time. I think this is quite bad. One, because of course it takes a while, but also card draw is pretty counterintuitive to big characters. In Altered, you get to play everything twice, or most things twice. So if you play your 5 and then your 6, they both go to your reserve. And now if you play a 7 and it goes to reserve, you're locked at 2 reserve slots and you have to discard 1. You don't really need card draw that much in Altered unless you're really low to the ground. So Subhash and Trace, who are both these really aggressive Axiom decks, need a lot of card draw because they're playing 1 and 2 costs and they're going to run out of cards really fast, right? If you have 4 mana and you play a 1 cost and you play a 2 cost and you don't have any other cards, now you're already wasting a mana. But if you have a 4 cost, you just need to play the 4, and on 4 mana you're good, and then next turn you'll even have it in your reserve to play again. So it's really, if you have expensive characters, card draw gets way less important. So I think I believe that this was kind of an interesting design. And maybe there's a combo where you're playing these really big characters, and then you're playing these really, really cheap spells. So you play a 5 cost character, and then you're hoping to draw all these 0 and 1 cost spells or something. I think unfortunately with the release set, we don't have that. There's only even 1 7 cost and 1 8 cost character he can play, so there's almost no 7 or 8 costs he can play. There's a few 5s and a few 6s, but above that, there's only Sakurabu, or however you say it, and then the big Leviathan dude for 7 and 8, which makes it so his hero ability is pretty blank, or at least not very effective at the moment. I think he has the most room for growth here. Like, he's going to the below average tier, but I think he could, you know, get to like very good in just 1 or 2 expansions pretty quickly. There's no 0 cost spells in the game right now. There's barely any 1 cost spells for Bravos, and there's just not a lot of big chunky dudes either once you get to 7, 8 plus. I think if he could play a 5, a 6, a 7, and 8, and then while he's drawing cards, he's like drawing 0 cost and 1 cost spells to throw in, that would be really good. Because right now, you like draw extra cards, but you really don't need them. If you play him, you realize like you've played your 5 and your 6, and now you have like 5 cards in hand and 2 in reserve, and you're still behind because you're just playing 1 big thing a turn, and if they remove it, you're screwed. So he's a bit too clunky right now, but I'm most excited for him in the coming year. Like by the end of 2025, he could be really, really good. So this is me being very hopeful for him. Right now, I don't think... I don't know why you wouldn't just play Kojo. If you want to play Bravos, you really should just play Kojo. Like, he gets guaranteed 2/2/2 every other turn. That's just straight up better than these two. None of these hero abilities have any high synergy with Bravos at all. Bravos is kind of a weird faction where they don't have like crazy synergies tying them together. It's not like Axiom that we talked about earlier that has all these really cool reserve synergies with and these Brass Bug Hive synergies. Like, there's a little bit of reserve stuff and some boost stuff, but it's not that much synergistic wise on the Bravo side. It's more just playing good quality cards. They're kind of the good stuff faction in some ways. Let's move on to the next faction. Oh wow, that's a cool bug. Just leaves Atsadi on there. What are we at? Next up we have Lyra. So mentioned earlier, Lyra is kind of the faction of randomness. We have these 3 heroes here. I think we can kind of sort everything for the most part here. We have these 3 heroes here. We're gonna drop them all on C like we do most times, just to start. So Nevenka is the starter deck hero for this one. She has a really high rolly, I guess pun intended, ability, where you can exhaust her, target a character you control, roll a die. Usually, most of the time, on rolls 2 to 5, it gets 1 boost. 6+, it gains anchored, and then 1 sent to reserve. So let's say you always get a 2 to 5, which is somewhat likely considering you roll it 4/6 of the time. Then she is equal to Kojo in how much stats she's getting, right? 1/1/1 every turn is 2/2/2 every other turn. I think that automatically puts her at least C tier. Now, she does have some synergy stuff she can do with her ability, right? Kojo, like I was saying, has basically no synergies he can do with his Buddha token. But Nevenka has some interesting things. Of course, if you roll a 1, you are just eating it, right? You lose that character, it goes to your reserve. Suppose it's not discarded, but if you spent 4 or 5 resources on it, you are probably losing that day. But if you roll a 6 and it gets anchored, that could be really powerful. Let's say you target something that is a 4/4/4. When you roll 6 and it gains anchored, you are getting it for free for another day. So you're basically getting its stats again. So if you roll a 6, you just got 4/4/4 in stats from her hero ability, which is pretty insane. Of course, the downside is you're targeting something more expensive, so you're scared to roll a 1. But there are quite a few synergistic tools she can play. I think in the future she'll get more as well. At the moment, there is Martingale. Let's actually turn this on here so we don't get copies. So Martingale says, if you would roll a die, you may add 1 to its result. It only costs 1 as well, so you can start your turn out with this. Very, very powerful. If you can get any uniques with this effect, you want them as well. Because if you add 1, you will literally never roll a 1, right? You're always adding 1, so it has to be at least a 2, which really negates her whole downside. Then you're 4/6 of the time going to roll and get a boost, and 2/6 of the time going to give it anchored. So this is like her best card. Really, really good. And then there is something that lets you roll a dice twice. It's her Bastion. I think if I look up Bastion, I just find all of them. Yeah, this one, the Ouroboros Lyra Bastion. If you would roll 1 or more dice, instead roll that many +1 and ignore the roll of your choice. So you get to roll 2 dice. Better chances of not rolling a 1 and better chances of rolling a 6. This is way worse than the Martingale, though. First of all, it doesn't even have stats itself, right? The Martingale is a 1/1/0, which is not great, but at least has stats. It costs way more, right? The rare costs 3/3, the common costs 4/4, so it costs way more than 1. And it doesn't even guarantee that you don't roll the 1, right? It just helps, but you could roll double 1s and still be screwed. So I think this is fine. You do probably want like 1 or 2 of these rare Bastions, because that can help quite a bit, especially when you have Martingale out. You can have really high chances of rolling a 6, and there's really nothing else at the moment until they print more. But I think she's pretty good. I think if you can roll a few 6s in the game, anchor some really beefy cards, you are going to be outvaluing most other decks. I do have to mention, I know we're just kind of talking about the hero itself at the moment, but Cloth Cocoon is also probably the strongest removal spell in the game right now, and she is one of the 2 factions that has access to it. Lyra is actually the base faction for it, and you're pretty happy playing the common. I think the common's actually the better version anyways. And so this is maybe the best removal spell in the game right now. Pretty happy to get 3 of this at common into her deck. And I think that kind of gives me a bit of a bias towards Lyra especially, but also Muna or Muna faction heroes because they are getting access to Cloth Cocoon. We'll talk a bit more later about why this is the best disruption or removal spell in the game at the moment, but it is quite good. It's quite good. Give me 1 second. All right. So because of that, we are going to take Nevenka and put her in above average. She's actually gonna chill here in B tier. She'll be our first B tier hero. I think if you're rolling those 6s, basically if you don't roll a 1 during the game, she is pretty good above average. If you only roll +1 boost, she's just a C tier hero. If you start rolling a single 6, then she's a B tier hero. Plus, like I said, you get Cloth Cocoon, which is pretty good. I'll put her in B tier. I think that might be one of the more controversial takes because people really don't like the randomness. But you can combat the randomness a little bit. And you can, get some 6s and you're really gaming on them. Let's see, who is our next hero in Lyra that it wants us to discuss? Auraq and Kibble. So Auraq and Kibble is pretty interesting. This says, when you play a character with the base statistics of 0, I gain a performance counter. Then at noon, you can spend 5 of my performance counters to reveal the top card of your deck. You may play it for free or put it into my hand. So every 5 characters you play with the base statistics of 0 gives him a performance counter. Let's say, for sake of argument, which is also probably just the case, you are playing only characters with a base statistic of 0. So every 5th character you play, after you play it, start of your next turn, you get a free card, either into your hand or ideally played for free. There is a slight miss chance where if you hit a spell, you might not have any targets for it. So you're hoping to hit, of course, high cost characters and or landmarks. This is probably even more high rolly than Lyra. Than Nevenka. Nevenka at least lets you target something. You can put these dice rolling cards out that let you not roll 1s or have lower chance to roll 1s. So she is consistent. You do it every turn. You get boosts. She's as consistent as you're going to see here. Auraq is kind of the opposite, right? You have to be hitting all these cards. There's this weird, what's the word I'm looking for? Like disconnect, where Auraq really wants you to play all these cheap characters to get his hero ability on faster, get all these counters, but also you want expensive stuff so that it's on the top of the deck and comes out for free. I think because of that disconnect and the fact that his hero ability doesn't actually generate any value, he's pretty similar to, he's kind of the Lyra version of Atsadi, in my opinion, where I think at the moment he's not very strong, but I think there's a lot of potential. I say that because at the moment, there's, as far as I'm aware, not really any way to manipulate the top of your deck, at least not easily. But in future sets, there might be something that says, put a card from your hand on top of your deck. Put a card from your reserve on top of your deck. And if you can do that for really cheap, like 0, 1, or maybe 2 costs, especially if it's attached to a creature, or a character, I mean, then you can put a big beefy thing on top of your deck and, get it off of Auraq, and then it's pretty insane value. And then I think he'll be good. I think there is Paint Prison, but maybe that only targets opponent stuff. Return target character or permanent to the top of his owner's deck. Yeah, but this isn't even worth it because you have to already have resolved the character or permanent. So I guess technically you can, instead of sending it to reserve, you can put it on top, but then you're spending a bunch of resources. Doesn't really make sense to Paint Prison your own stuff. But yeah, I think Auraq is pretty interesting. Like I said, similar to Atsadi, I think will have a place in the future meta, but I think at the moment is not really where you want to be, and has a little too much inconsistency and doesn't really have a coherent game plan that's going to work enough of the time. So the last one we have to talk about here is Fen and Crowbar. So Fen and Crowbar is very interesting. The least random of the Lyra heroes, in the sense that you're not rolling dice or randomly flipping off the top of your deck as much. Fen and Crowbar says, during morning, draw only 1 card, instead of the normal 2, of course. Then put the top card of your deck in your mana zone, instead of a card from your hand. So even though you're only drawing 1 card, you get to put a card from your deck into your mana zone, which is effectively the same thing as just drawing 2 cards and putting 1 of them in, but you don't get the choice. So instead of drawing 2 and putting 1 of those in, you are just forced to draw 1, and the next one goes into your mana. But it has a interesting ability where at noon you resupply. So that is the upside, right? Downside is you are being forced to put 1 of the 2 cards into mana. You don't get a pick between the 2. You don't even get a pick not to do it. You just have to do it. Major upside is at noon you resupply. So you're getting a free half a card, we'll say. I think anything going to reserve directly is essentially half a card. You get a free half a card every turn. Now, how good is a free half a card every turn? Sorry, at the bottom it says ignore my abilities during the first day. So the first day you do the normal thing, draw 6 cards, put 3 in, use your 3 mana. This starts on the second turn when you start drawing 2. Doesn't matter too much. But the main question of this card is, how good is drawing half a card a turn? Essentially, how good is resupplying every turn? And is it worth the downside of only drawing 1 and being forced to put the other one into mana without a choice? We have to look at some of the context here. The first one is, of course, you get Cloth Cocoon, as I mentioned. But the second one is that Lyra in particular has access to a lot of cards that trigger from discard. So that is when you have this bottom text, you can discard it from your reserve and you get an effect, such as the next card you play this turn costs 1 less. So this is free. You just have to discard it from your reserve and you get the effect. Some of these are okay, like the next thing costs 1 less. Is that really worth discarding it? Maybe. It means her half a card basically gave you 1 free mana if you say you hit one of these. How good is 1 free mana a turn? Quite good. I think 1 mana is worth more than 1/1/1 in stats. You can usually convert it into more in stats if you're playing something bigger. For example, you can get something cheaper out earlier. I think 1 mana is probably worth more than 1/1/1 in stats, but you can even get really strong effects like discard target character with hand cost 3 or less gains anchored. Now, giving something with hand cost 3 or less anchored is usually worth at least 2 mana to do so, like way more than 1 mana. 2 mana to play like meditation training. Often I'm pretty happy resolving meditation training for 3 from my reserve as well. So giving something anchored is really good. If you give a 3 cost with good stats, let's say this 3 cost you give anchored, she's 3/3/4. You're getting her for another turn, so you're getting a free 3/3/4 in stats. So her hero ability gave you 3/3/4 in stats that turn. That is really good. So you're going to always be playing, at the moment, it's just the Hatter and Kodama, I think, outside of some uniques that have that ability. So you'll basically always play at least the common Hatter and the Kodama, because you really want that free anchored ability. You'll play a lot of these other discard effects, like getting 1 cost reduction, getting a 1/1/1. You'll play, I think, probably all the commons at least. This one says return another card from your reserve to your hand, so it's kind of getting you basically that half a card back. So this one just cancels out essentially what your hero ability did. It's pretty interesting. I think half a card a turn is powerful because of all the synergies that Lyra has. So I'm going to put Fen in A tier because I think half a card a turn, a free resupply every turn, is worth quite a bit more than a free 1/1/1 in stats. So we'll put her in A tier. I think she's quite good, and I expect to see quite a bit of Fen and Crowbar, especially because the removal suite with Cloth Cocoon is quite powerful. Let's go to Muna. Muna's probably my favorite faction at the moment. And we have Tasia and Naru as the starter deck hero. Tasia and Naru says, the first character you play each afternoon gains 1 boost. Now, this is pretty comparable to Kojo, where it is 1/1/1 every turn. As long as you play a character, it's really not that hard to play a character every turn. I don't think we'll have to consider that as not happening the majority of the time. You will be playing a character every turn. I mean, you can build your deck to be all characters if you're really worried about it. But you're getting 1/1 every turn. Now, a few things to consider. One, it is in Muna. So as we spoke about, you get Cloth Cocoon, which I really like. Cloth Cocoon is the best removal. So Cloth Cocoon, big ups already. I know we're just talking, I'm trying to talk about the hero in a bit of a vacuum, but also I'm just talking about the meta in general based on just the first set. So Cloth Cocoon, big bonus. But the other thing is you get Anchored. So Anchored is on a lot of Muna cards. It is one of their main abilities that they can activate. Anchored says, as you can see here, during rest, I don't go to reserve and I lose Anchored. So it sticks around an extra turn instead of going to your reserve. That is a huge synergy with Tasia. So instead of getting just the 1/1/1 worth, you're actually getting it a second time for free, right? So you play your Spindle Harvester here, it gets 1/1/1 in a boost. So now it's a 2/1/1 for 1, which is already really above average stats. But then it has Anchored, so next turn it's still a 2/1/1 because boosts also stay while a character is in the expedition zone. So now you have not gotten a free 1 boost, you've essentially gotten a free 2 boost. So if you can build your deck away, which I think you can build a Tasia deck in such a way that every turn, the first character you play, because it has to be first character, the first character you play is Anchored, or at least the large majority of the time the first character you play is Anchored. Tasia is essentially giving you a free 2/2/2 in stats every turn, which is really good. There's also access to some pretty strong cards. There's Hydrocana, which is almost certainly, especially rare Hydrocana, is almost certainly the best single character in the game right now in terms of ramping into it, or in terms of winning the game by itself. We'll talk about Robin Hood a bit later. Robin Hood is maybe also the best character in the game, but he's not going to like quantifiably win you the game. You know, he will probably win you the game in a lot of ways, but it's hard to say like that's exactly why. Where Hydrocana is like, okay, I have an expedition that's at 20 every single turn because I have a Hydrocana in it. It comes with Tough, which makes it hard to remove, all that. So with Cloth Cocoon access, with the hero ability getting close to 2/2/2 in stats every turn, and with access to Hydrocana, I think I'm going to give Tasia our first broken. First broken, 2/2/2 in stats every turn, Cloth Cocoon, Hydrocana. I think that's pretty good. It's not like quite broken. I think realistically, after a set or two comes out, she'll be A tier, like high A tier. Her hero ability is still really good, and Hydrocana and Cloth Cocoon are probably still going to always be good. But like, it's not like she's doing kind of insane synergies. Like, she's not doing some of the stuff that Subhash can do, where I talked about if you like day 2 Hive, day 3 Hive, you're making 12 in stats every single turn, starting on like the second turn of the game or the third turn of the game. Like, that's stupid. That's like a really big high roll that Subhash can do. And some of these heroes can do these really crazy high rolls, right? Tasia doesn't really have high rolls. Her high roll is like, oh, I get Hydrocane out really fast and my opponent can't remove it. But I think at the moment, with the Hydrocana, Cloth Cocoon, all of that, those synergies coming together, I think she is considered broken in this day 1 meta. She's very good, very good. Let's look at the other Muna heroes, keeping in context that Cloth Cocoon and Hydrocana exists. Let's look at Argent and Spike. Argent and Spike is my personal favorite hero at the moment. I don't think he's quite as good as Tasia, unfortunately, but he's really fun, and he's got this cute little cactus friend here. Argent and Spike says, exhaust, discard a card from your reserve. The next character you play this turn with hand cost 3 or less gains Anchored. So, quite a lot of costs here. First of all, it's only once per turn, which I guess is like most. You have to exhaust him, for sure. but you have to discard a card from your reserve. So you're going down what we'll effectively call half a card. And also, it's pretty hard to do it first turn of the game. Sometimes even hard to do it the second turn of the game, because you have to have like something go to your reserve, which means it either ends a turn in the expedition zone and then goes to reserve, or you play some sort of resupply effect. So he's not impossible to use in the first 2 turns, but much harder to use compared to Tasia, for example. Tasia, you just play any anchored character and she's getting 2/2 on the first and second turn of the game, right? Argent, not really going to be doing the same thing. Needs a lot more setup. And how good is going down half a card to give something anchored? I think this is quite good, but a little conditional, because you're committing a lot to a single character by going down half a card just to give it anchored. It is really susceptible to removal. If your opponent removes the 3 costs you play, you are down half a card and really with no upside. So you are pretty susceptible to removal. Of course, you can also have Tasia's stuff removed, but she's not going down half a card to play her stuff. She's not going down any cards to use her hero ability. Argent has to set up something in his reserve, then discard it to get the hero ability off. So that is a big downside. The upside is mostly broken uniques. Mostly broken uniques is the upside. So if we go to my Argent deck at the moment, there are only a few good 3s to really resolve at the moment. There are just these 2 rares. If you get anchored on Cernunnos, his hero ability is giving you minus half a card for plus 4/4/4/4, right? Because you get this an extra turn. That's quite good. I mean, half a card to get a free quote-unquote 4/4/4 in stats is really, really strong. Same with Daughter of Yggdrasil, but only having 6 good targets makes the deck pretty bad, right? If you don't draw any of these, you just have like no hero ability, right? So we need these powerful uniques, and what better uniques than the Quetzalcoatl, which has a really powerful ability when he gets to last a turn. He says when an opponent draws 1 or more cards or does resupply blank, right? The uniques are all different, but they all, basically every Quetzalcoatl unique should say when an opponent draws 1 or more cards or does resupply. Then he gets an effect. This example, he gains 2 boosts. So he's a little bit weaker than Cernunnos when you play him, who's a 4/4/4. He's a 4/4/2. But when your opponent, at the start of their turn, draws their cards, he then becomes a 6/6/4, which is really powerful. And if you can re-anchor him, quite strong. I think that doesn't make Argent good, because if I'm saying, oh, you have to have uniques to make him good, that's not a very good reason. I'm just kind of showing off my Argent deck that cares about these 3-cost Quetzalcoatls. I'm trying to find a 3rd one. And then you can have like 9 good targets. But you can see, like, I don't even have other 3s in the deck, really. We just have stuff to support it. I'll do a deck tech on this at some point. But all that to say, he is certainly below average. Maybe average. I think he is another below average hero, though, that will get better with future sets. There are just not a lot of good 3s at the moment, right? Like I said, there's Daughter of Yggdrasil. There is Cernunnos. That's basically it, unless you have good uniques. 6 targets is just not a lot, and I can't really recommend any hero based on, oh, just get good uniques, because, yeah, that's horrible. Like, what if you don't find them? What if they're really expensive? I'm not going to base any of this around uniques. It's all based around commons and rares. I think it's a bit silly to do anything like, oh, just get the unique for it. So, of course, I think my Argent deck is good, but I had to spend money on ice uniques for it. So he's below average right now. Once they print like another 2 good 3-costs he can play, so he can have 12 total, I think he'll be like above average, actually. So maybe he should be average right now, because I think his hero ability is actually better than Kojo if you can do it every single turn. So if you can do it every turn, it's above average. I just don't know how consistently you can do that right now, especially with just the common and rare suite. So I'm going to put him below average with the like condition where he's B tier if you have really good uniques that are 3 cost. And now the last of the Muna heroes, we have Rin and Orchid. Rin and Orchid says, when one of your expeditions moves forward due to the grass element, draw a card, then put a card from your hand in reserve. So a bit similar to Traced, who we started out with, where she draws a card, then puts a card from your hand in reserve. Her condition is different, though. Instead of having to play 5 cards from reserve, you have to win an expedition with grass. And this doesn't trigger twice, so it's only... What does it? When one of your expedition moves forward due to your grass. One or more. I guess it does trigger twice, right? It doesn't say 1 or more. That's kind of interesting. So if you can double win, you double win harder, basically. She is kind of the definition of a win more hero, right? It's like you're already winning the expedition, which is the whole point of the game. And then you get extra benefit. So she's kind of snowball-y in that sense. You do have to win on a specific element, and of course, that element will not always be available in every expedition, so her heal ability is not guaranteed to trigger every turn. But when it does trigger, she gets half a grass, whatever, or half a card of value, right? You draw a card, put a card from your hand in reserve. Of course, we talked about with Trace, there are play from reserve synergies. I don't think hers is nearly as consistent. It's a lot easier to turn on Traced by playing 5 cards from reserve than it is to like win an expedition specifically on grass. You're gonna have a lot of games where you maybe stall for a turn or two and neither person wins, or you just have one person win on just moves forward once on water. And then like this hero ability does nothing for like a turn or two. So I think it's a bit too inconsistent to really get any value. It's a occasional half a card. And like I said, of course, it's a bit better than half a card if you're playing from reserve synergies, but I don't even know how worth it is to play from reserve synergies in her because I don't know how often you're going to be winning those expeditions. I do like her snowballiness, and she is another character that could end up kind of broken at some point if they print like way too many good grass characters, or if they like somehow make it possible to change an expedition to grass. So if you take the water expedition and be like, oh, now this is grass for the turn, and then she can win for it. See, I know I'm calling it grass. I don't know what to call it. But if you can turn it into leaf for the turn, then maybe that's pretty broken. But I think at the moment, it's a bit too inconsistent. I will, on further reflection, I think Argent should be at least average because I was talking a lot about how broken Cloth Cocoon is. He gets to play Cloth Cocoon. I guess she gets to play Cloth Cocoon too. Yeah, I think she's still a little too inconsistent, but maybe we'll put Argent in average. He is probably going to get equal to Kojo plus Cloth Cocoon and Hydrocana. But I think maybe Rin and Orchid is a little too inconsistent. All right, let's go to Ordis. So Ordis is considered probably the best faction in the game. It doesn't get Cloth Cocoon, sadly. It does get Sticky Note Seals, which is in like the top 3 removals in the game. Oh wait, what am I? Oh, I'm on Muna. Sticky Note Seals. Sticky Note Seals. Can I zoom in on it, please? Yeah. Sticky Note Seals, 3-cost removal spell. Choose 1, send to reserve target character with hand cost 4 or more. Discard target permanent with hand cost 4 or more. Not as flexible as Cloth Cocoon. Obviously, it costs the same, but Cloth Cocoon hits basically anything. Of course, they have to have tokens on the characters, but it hits most things. It does hit any permanent, whereas Sticky Note 4 or more is a condition, but I have to say 4 or more is not that much of a condition because it always is going to trade up, right? This costs 3, and if it has to hit a 4 or better, you're going to be spending less mana to remove the thing than they spent on it. So it's quite a good rate in that sense. Like, if it hits a 4, you're already getting a 1 discount on, let's say it's a permanent, right? Because you can discard that. If they spent 4 on the permanent, you're trading up by 1 mana. 5, 2 mana, 6, 3 mana. This is a really scary card for the Brass Bug Hive players because it's a 6-cost rare permanent. They play that. You hit it with this. You just got a 3-cost discount essentially. Pretty good removal. It's not quite as good as Cloth Cocoon, like I said, but probably in the top 3 removal in the game in terms of rate. So that's another thing to keep in context here. Now, Sigismar and Wingspan is the starter deck hero for Ordis, and he says at noon, create a Ordis Recruit 1/1/1 soldier token in your hero expedition. So this is starting out kind of the basic hero that we were talking about, right? Gets 1/1/1 every turn. That's what I was saying is like the bare minimum. It's what Kojo gets. There are a few things, quite a few things, that are in his favor though. So let's talk about those. First one, getting 1/1/1 every turn is better than 2/2/2 every other turn, because now you are contesting that expedition every single turn. So your opponent has to play something there, or you'll win the expedition. And 1/1/1 hits every single expedition type. It doesn't have any zeros, so your opponent has to contest your hero expedition every single turn. That's pretty powerful. I think that already is better than Kojo. I'd rather have 1/1/1 every turn than 2/2/2 every other turn. But Sigismar also has a lot of combos in Ordis to boost these tokens that Kojo just doesn't have access to. So if we look down here at the landmark, for example, the Monolith, Ordis Bastion, zooming in, it's not really going to help. This card here, it's a 5-cost landmark, so quite expensive, but it says when a character joins your expedition, it gains 1 boost. So any character joining your expedition just gets a boost. That counts your tokens. Tokens are characters. So once you play that, now you're getting a 2/2/2 every turn, plus any other things you create, right? So you can play one card that makes him like a doubly powerful card, and if you play a second one of the landmarks, you're getting a 3/3/3 every turn. And it's not just a token that's getting this benefit, it's every single character you play. Ordis is also based around tokens, so you have cards like Charge, which gives all your characters 1 boost. Characters like Anubis, where each player sacrifices a character. If you're just sacrificing your 1/1/1, and you can force your opponent to sacrifice a much bigger thing, like a 4/4/4, that's huge value. You're trading up quite a lot in stats. There's things that if you control 3 or more other characters, I gain 2 boosts, so care about having a bunch of other characters. If you control 3 or more other characters, draw a card. There's just so many synergies around tokens in Ordis that really make Sigismar hum, right? Buffing the token, caring about the token, sacrificing the token. It's kind of absurd how many synergies there are. I think that makes Sigismar very good. It's like such a buff compared to what Kojo can do. Kojo has, at the moment, effectively no synergies with his token. He gets this cool 2/2/2 every turn, doesn't really do anything special. Sigismar gets the same amount of token value from his hero ability, but he can buff it, he can sacrifice it, he can care about having it on the board. He can do all these powerful things with his token that he's getting every turn. So I think he goes from average to very good, especially considering how good the rest of the Ordis cards are in general. The next Ordis card we have to talk about is Waru and Mac. So Waru and Mac has a similar ability in some ways, where you are going to be getting a 1/1/1 most turns. So it says, at noon, if you control 1 or more bureaucrats, create a 1/1/1 soldier token in target expedition. So obvious downsides, you have to control a bureaucrat at the start of your turn. So you have to have somehow kept a bureaucrat around. Other downside, it doesn't work on the very first turn of the game, because noon happens before anything else, and of course you're not going to control anything when the game starts. So Sigismar automatically gets at least 1 more than Waru and Mac can ever get, because he'll start with 1. Upside, you get to put it in target expedition. Sigismar only can put it in the hero expedition. Waru and Mac can put it in either of the expeditions, which is quite powerful. So being able to choose which one, pretty nice. But the second part of the hero ability is what makes this really absurd. It says when you play a bureaucrat, you may have it gain a sleep. So it during dusk will ignore its statistics, but during rest, it doesn't go to reserve and it loses a sleep. So your bureaucrat is basically blank in terms of stats that turn, but it will stick around until the next turn, in which case then it will care about its stats and will stick around. But that makes it so easy, of course, to do the top line of text, because as long as you just asleep every bureaucrat you play, or most of them, you will get that 1/1/1 every turn. So he's like a slightly slower Sigismar, if you just look at it like that, where the first turn you don't get one, but every turn after you are quite likely to get a 1/1/1, and you can put it in target expedition. So if we're just thinking about the hero ability and the value, he's already very good, right? He's already very good because he's essentially getting the same thing as Sigismar with the same cards available to him, but he gets it not on the first turn, but after that he gets to put it in target expedition. So we'll say he's very good to start, but we have to look at how incredibly powerful keeping around bureaucrats are. Let's look at two of the strongest ones right here, Robin Hood and Toth. Robin Hood, rare, says cards your opponent play costs one more. And while going asleep causes a character to not count its stats for the turn, so you would count these all as zeros at the end of the turn, it does not ignore their ability. So your cards your opponents play still cost one more, which is pretty absurd because now you're getting it for 2 turns. You don't have to work for it. You just get a sleep from the hero ability, like no work required. And now your opponent's taxed one more on all their cards. It's about as broken as a combo as you can see just by a card by itself with your hero ability. Also looking at the rare Toth, it says, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, create 2 Ordis recruits, 1/1/1 soldier tokens, and target expeditions after rest. Well, if you play him on 3, you will unfortunately lose the expedition. So on the first turn of the game you play him, you asleep him. You will lose that expedition, or at least not move forward. It doesn't say you even have to lose it. It just says you have to not move forward. Well, he's asleep. He has no stats. You don't do anything. Sure. Next turn, your hero ability makes a 1/1 because you have a bureaucrat. Toth makes 2/2. So now you have gotten 2/2 from this guy, plus a 1/1 from your hero ability. You're starting the next turn of the game with 6/6/5 in stats, off of just playing a 3-cost card. Like, you're getting 6/6/5 in stats from playing a 3-cost card. And he could do it again. Like, if your opponent tries to block you and they win, and you somehow, or you give him a sleep or something, it's just kind of insane. This doesn't even consider how we were talking about how tokens can be buffed. So later in the game, if you play this and you have that any kind of buff stuff for your tokens, like the monolith, now you're making, instead of 3 1/1/1s, you're making 3 2/2/2. So he's making 6/6/6 in stats. It's really insane. And that's just 2 of the bureaucrats we talked about. There is a lot of bureaucrats in this set. They really pumped up the bureaucrat numbers. It's not like they just made 3 bureaucrats. I think you could play like almost 39 cards and have them all be bureaucrats. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's the right amount to play. But if you look at this, like, we're playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're playing 21 bureaucrats, and I'm not even playing all of them. I'm just playing like the ones that I think are good, and I'm playing 21 bureaucrats. So it's over half my deck is bureaucrats. So I will draw one, should draw one every turn when you're drawing 2 cards. And that doesn't count like also playing them from reserve. You basically will never miss a bureaucrat unless you get like unfathomably unlucky. Your hero ability will always be on. You have these disruptive text boxes that they basically all have. And you get a 1/1 and you get combos. This deck is not even like optimized. This is just kind of an example starting deck. It probably should have the monolith here. But yeah, this hero is pretty insane. He is certainly the best hero in the game at the moment, I think. Has sticky note seals, which is really good removal. Has Robin Hood, which is probably the best creature because you get a tax. He's the only tax creature at the moment, so you get to make your opponent pay 1 more for everything, and you get to asleep it for free. So it's going to last at least 2 turns. So if you can start as first player, play it, yeah, really, really good. You get a bunch of free 1/1/1s, so it's like a Sigismar, but has a whole second text box on its hero, right? Like, it effectively does the same thing as Sigismar on the top, as long as you're playing bureaucrats. Then the second part of your hero ability just like really makes your bureaucrats insane. So yeah, Waru, I am going to say, is the other broken hero in the game. We do still have one more Ordis hero to look at here. That's Gulrang and Toxin. It says, whenever you create a token, it gains 1 boost. That's quite good. We have talked about the monolith a bunch, which says when a character joins your expedition, it gains 1 boost. It's not quite as good as that because it only cares about tokens. But if your deck is focused on making tokens, it's almost like a free 5-cost landmark when you start the game. Like I said, it doesn't hit everything, so maybe we'll say it's like a free 3-cost landmark. But either way, 3 free resources at the start of the game sounds quite powerful. But we have a second line of text that says, if you have less than 8 mana orbs, boosted tokens you control have Defender. Now, that is quite a downside. Defender means their expeditions cannot advance during dusk. So it's not like, oh, this card doesn't count, like a sleep or something. Even if you have 20/20 in stats from other stuff that aren't boosted tokens, it still won't move forward. So you're getting really handicapped by having any kind of boosted tokens. Really bad. You don't want to like have a bad hero ability until then. Of course, you are getting the boost still, and so maybe you can slow the game down a bunch and your opponent can't do much until then. But I don't know, man. It's just not really even close to as powerful as the other two. It's so slow. Having to wait until turn 5 to really get the benefit of your top of your ability is just such a downside. I want to put it in a below average because of how bad the hero ability is, but there's some upsides. The Ordis card pool is really good. You get sticky note seals, you get really strong Ordis cards. You have a lot of synergies with making tokens in Ordis. The top line of the hero ability is really good, getting a free boost on all your tokens. There's a lot of things that make me think, like, yeah, this card could be really powerful, but I'm just not confident in it. It's just not exactly where you want to be. I think maybe I mean, the hero ability by itself is below average. Maybe with the Ordis card pool, if you can stick it out long enough to get to day 5 and you're not that far behind, like you've managed to block your opponent from moving forward enough in expeditions, then it's like at least a B tier hero ability. So maybe I'll give it middle of the road at average here. Kind of like Argent, where I think maybe the hero abilities by themselves are kind of D tier, but in combo with their card pool, they're maybe a bit better than D tier. Okay, now we are on to the last faction. We are on to Yzmir, which is my least favorite name of them because it's so hard for me to remember and pronounce. But the starter deck hero is Akesha and Taru. This is another one that's a bit hard to evaluate, right? It just says tap it after you. You can only activate this if you are the first player. Now, being the second player is pretty strong. You know, you get to respond to everything your opponent's doing. I like that. You are... Yeah, I mean, there's not much else advantage, right? You get to respond to everything. That's nice. You're basically always responding. And you are always able to control a bit of what's going on. That's all pretty good. The faction Yzmir does have access to quite a lot of removal. It's not amazing removal at the moment because we are in the first set, so there's not like a lot of options, but it's definitely not bad for a starting set for the amount of removal there is. So I think that's nice. But you're not actually gaining anything from the hero ability. There's no boost. There's no token. You're not gaining anything. So it's really like, how good is responding? I think responding isn't bad. You'll definitely get a slight advantage from it. Do I think it's 1-1-1? I think it's probably at least... I'll put it in average, because I think some of these hero abilities are like almost no benefit in a lot of games, or very little, where Akesha will at least always get to be the person going second, which I think is good with what her game plan will end up being. I don't really have too much more to say about it because it's kind of hard to quantify. I just think she'll end up being average. Her hero ability lets her go second. That's kind of nice. Linda Woven Maw says, tap this to create a Maw 000 companion token in your companion expedition with, when you sacrifice a character, I gain 2 boosts. This action costs 1 more if you are not the first player. So if we look at it from a stat standpoint again, you're getting nothing, and sometimes you have to pay 1 to get nothing. That's horrible. You compare it to Sigismar, who gets just a free 1/1/1 every turn. This is a 0/0/0, and sometimes a 1 cost 0/0/0. So horrible, right? Of course, it's more than that. When you sacrifice a character, it gains 2 boosts. You can also use it as sacrifice fodder itself. So how good is sacrificing a character, or how much benefit can you get from sacrificing a character? I think at the moment, unfortunately, it's not as much as we would want to see, right? You can, let's say you use something like Anubis, which is an Ordis card originally. Each player sacrifices a character, and you sacrifice the Maw you made. It's effectively the same thing as Sigismar doing it, or Waru, but sometimes it's worse because you have to pay 1 for the Maw. If you're just doing anything where you want to sacrifice the Maw itself, that's pretty bad, right? Like Kuat, Boom, Gift of Self. These are all like just straight up worse than an Ordis character doing it, right? Because the Ordis characters, specifically Sigismar and Waru, are getting the token for effectively free every turn, and it starts with 1/1/1. Lindawa gets a 0/0/0, sometimes has to pay for it. That's worse. If you don't sacrifice it, you sacrifice something else, like this Moonlight Jellyfish, then it gets 2 boosts. That's kind of interesting. Then it's a 2/2/2. If you got it for free, then you're like Kojo, essentially. If you paid 1 for it, it's a slightly worse Kojo, but you can do it every turn. It does trigger for every time you sacrifice a character, so if you do it multiple times in a turn, then it's really kind of gaming. But as you can see, if I look at everything that has the word sacrifice in it in Yzmir, really low at the moment. Like, some of these aren't even great, like the Kraken is a little too expensive. Gift of Self, Anubis, Kuat, Baba Yaga, and Boom are like your only actual sacrifice. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 sacrifice things. Not bad, but they're not really even great sacrifice cards. They're not bad though. Yeah, I just don't see the huge benefit to playing it over an Ordis deck based on tokens and sacrificing. Of course, maybe you have access to more of the tokens and sacrificing stuff, but I'm not seeing it too much. I think it has more potential than Akesha maybe, because you actually can get like a tangible benefit. If you get 4/4/4 for free, that's really, really good. So I think she can go above average because she has this kind of high roll potential where you can get these double sacrifices. You paid 0 because you were going first, and you make a 4/4. Like, that's really, really good. It just requires so much setup, right? Because you have to have 2 things to sacrifice. You have to play things that sacrifice it, and you have to, ideally be going first to get the free token. I don't know why they made it cost 1 when you're not the first player. It seems like she still wouldn't be great even with that. But I think maybe it is some future-proofing for later. That's my best guess, at least, as to why they did it. Because I think otherwise it doesn't really make that much sense. I think it's future-proofing. Because I think if there are some really broken sacrifice effects in the future, like if Lindawa and Maw can make a bunch of tokens really easily and then sacrifice those tokens really easily, then yeah, her hero ability is like a 4/4 or a 6/6/6 for free, and that's like pretty insane. So I think she could end up after a few sets, if they print enough token generation and sacrifice power in Yzmir, like sure, she could probably end up in A tier, S tier. I think at the moment, yeah, maybe B, maybe C. bit hard to say. It really depends on how her game goes. Like if she can get big stats on it, then it's above average. If she just gets kind of average stats and it's just like a Kojo, there's not really any specific synergy. But yeah, maybe I'll stick her with C. We'll do a hype B for Lindua. Probably should be a C. Nah, maybe we'll say B. She's pretty cool. Let's look at Aphanos, the last Yzmir hero. He says when you play a spell, target character you control gains 1 boost. Pretty simple hero ability. You play a spell, character gains 1 boost. So let's think on the surface. Most similar is Tasia. Tasia says the first character you play each turn gains 1 boost. So hers is by default much easier because you don't have to have a character already, right? Like for Aphanos, you have to have a character in play and then play a spell. And then you get the boost. Tasia just gives the boost to the character. Hey, Nightflux. Yeah, I'm still doing Fab. We're just picking up Altered as well. Trying it out for a bit. I think it's going to be exciting, cool game. But my next stream, probably on Sunday, will be a Fab stream going over all the spoiled cards in the new set after the world premiere in Tampa Bay. Yeah, so Aphanos, kind of a worse Tasia on the surface, but has a higher ceiling, right? Because if you play a character and then you play 2 spells, you can get 2 boosts, which is now the same as, effectively the same as Tasia giving something with anchored boost, because you're giving that effectively 2 boosts. But if Aphanos gives something with anchored 2 boosts, now he's effectively giving it 4 boosts. How much anchored is in Yzmir? I don't think yet there is enough to make this quite powerful enough. We've effectively got 2 characters, which are just ported over from Muna, funny enough. These 2 characters have anchored. You probably want to always play Sneezer Shroom, because it also gets boosts at the start of a turn. You might want Spindle Harvesters as well. And then you have Meditation Training also from Muna, which you probably want to give stuff anchored. It's pretty good synergy because his hero ability will give it a counter when you play this, and it gets anchored. So you're basically guaranteed getting 2/2/2 value from the hero ability with Meditation Training. Muna Caregiver you probably don't want because it's not a spell and it takes a while. But there are some other synergies. For example, Seasoned. Seasoned says, I keep my boosts when I go to reserve. This is certainly worse. Oh, Arthur, yeah, you just mentioned Seasoned as well. Yeah, this is another synergy. These are also both coming from Bravos, I believe. And yeah, Seasoned is nice because the boosts don't go away. Downside is you have to pay for it again, right? So Anchored is effectively the same thing where you get the boost the second turn, but you don't even have to pay for it. It just stays in play. Seasoned, you then have to pay for it a second time. So this costs 1 the first time, comes out, gets his counters, you put counters on it, nice. It goes to reserve, but then you have to play it another time, and you get the counters again, but you did have to pay for it. So certainly a downside there. Yeah, I like Seasoned, but it's just not really, it's not really as good as Anchored. I think I would focus more on those 3 Anchored cards. Maybe you'll play all of this, honestly. Like maybe you'll play Meditation Training, the 2 Anchored characters, and the 2 Seasoned characters. But I think the Anchored ones are gonna like be more efficient in terms of resources. You'll probably play at least Bravo's Blade Dancer here. And then there are some other synergies. I think there's one that draws you a card when it has counters. Yeah, Katagiran Mage Dancer. When you play a spell, I gain 1 boost, so he's like doubling those boosts. And at Dusk, if I have 3 or more boosts, draw a card. I don't know if this is worth it, because you're probably going to be fine on cards anyways. But I think it's nice. I think he is pretty close to Tasia in terms of getting value from the hero ability. I think he's a more aggressive version because he doesn't have the good removal of like Cloth Cocoon. He doesn't have the really high ends of Hydrocana, but he can get a little more speed and a little more of those boosts faster. I don't know if that puts him in A or B. I think I'm going to put him in B because he doesn't have as good removal, doesn't have something powerful to ramp into, but is equally as susceptible, if not more so, to disruption, right? Because he's stacking all his boosts on one thing. Let's say you really combo, you get a bunch of boosts on one character, it gets removed, you feel like shit. Tasia can kind of spread it out because she just wants the first thing played with Anchored, get that value there. Then she kind of doesn't care the rest of the turn. Like, she can play whatever she wants. She doesn't need to care about stacking stuff. She gets enough value from that starting thing. So I'll put him in B for now. He's probably, if I had to rank it, this, 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 maybe something like this is like a rough ranking within the tiers, with like the front of the tier being the strongest, or the closest to being up to the next tier. Yeah, this is I think where I'm gonna have the tier list for now. Let's look at some quick